All right. What film is we discussing today?
Mark Zuckerberg's biography.
Hell yes, baby. Hell fucking
That, that,
yes.
that he hates, by the way. He said that he didn't like the film because it was inaccurate.
Ahmed, what's your take, baby?
Oh man! This is when you're watching this film, you know that you're gonna pay an insane amount of effort to try to dissect how the screenplay works. Even though there's an insane amount of videos on YouTube, articles that speak about Sorkin's style of writing and structure and everything, trying to do it yourself. This is an insane workout. This is an insane workout. And for some reason, I believe Fincher doesn't get enough credit because the writing overshadows the directing craft. Because you know how good the writing is when you watch the film or read the screenplay. It's an insane piece of drama. I think this could easily be most entertaining screenplay I've ever read.
I totally agree with you. Easily the most entertaining screenplay I've ever read as well.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the script is very long, isn't it? I noticed that it's 160 pages long. Even though the film
And you know
is
what?
2
There is
hours.
this fun story that it's 168 and Fincher refused to cut anything from it. And when he went to the studio, he got Sorkin with him and he asked Aaron Sorkin to read the screenplay with the pace he's imagining it to be.
Right.
And he calculated the duration of every single scene and it added up to an hour 59 minutes. So for some reason, Fincher knew that it's yes, it
could
the
work.
count is 168
Yeah.
pages or 160 or 164 pages, but he knew it's never going to exceed the 2 hour limit that the studio was hoping for.
Do you reckon he worked out the editing in his head beforehand?
I do believe so because during the very few moments of silence, it falls heavier than in any other film.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So there is these fast cuts and the dialogue is overlapping as if they are talking at
Yeah,
each other. No one
yeah.
is really listening. And when there is a moment of silence, it does feel heavy. I totally believe that Fincher had that in mind when he first read the script. Because when you read the script, I think with Sorkin's writing, okay, this would sound weird. There is always cut to, cut to, cut to. No single scene ends as if it's over.
Yeah.
It delivers to the scene afterwards. It delivers to the one that's coming after. It always does that. So as if you're reading the 164 or 68 pages, it feels like as if one block
Right.
with no room to breathe.
Yeah.
The very few moments of silence, they are deliberately chosen as well.
I totally agree. I also think that he had at least the snappy editing in mind when he was directing this film. And I highly, highly recommend people to watch this documentary. It's a documentary on the making of The Social Network. It's for free. It's on YouTube. My favorite part of that documentary was seeing how David Fincher intellectualized every single word on the page. And it's the 3 weeks rehearsal with Aaron Sorkin and with the actors inside the room. And David Fincher just going and digging deep behind the subtext of every single line and how this man managed to edit the already near perfect words of Aaron Sorkin. Fincher is so confident in the craft of putting words to picture that he pushes back on Aaron Sorkin, but obviously very constructively. And I truly see a master of the craft, because Fincher never misses a beat. Like there's a moment where Justin Timberlake is proposing a new way of saying a particular line, and Fincher, without missing a beat, says, okay, I like the first half, hate the second half. It's an exercise in craft that I seldom see. Fincher's like, I need to know exactly what every single line of this script means, and he'll stay like a full day just on one scene. What happened with that is that when they then arrived on set, Fincher also knew the inflections of certain lines, like the greatest opening of all time with Erica Albright and Mark Zuckerberg. That final delivery is, it'll be because you're an asshole, when she whispers it. I thought, oh, that's such a great acting choice from Rooney Mara. You look at the making of and you realize, no, that was an actual direction from David Fincher. And then he proceeds to give like a 3-minute explanation just on why she would whisper that one line.
Yeah, actually, Sorkin says that the screenplay he wrote leaves no room for improvisation.
Yes, that's correct.
So every single thing was prepared beforehand, and with that delivery of "you're an asshole," Sorkin tells the story of when Fincher was reading the screenplay and he was going through the pages of the opening scene,
Yeah.
and he says, "If this woman doesn't punch that guy, I'm not doing that film." When he flips the page, he reads the line, "You're an asshole," and he says, That's the punch. This is what he wanted.
That's it.
So basically, he was imagining how she's going to deliver that as if she's putting all the rage and all the emotions to end that conversation.
Correct.
With her regaining or having some sort of an autonomy on the scene, because the guy
that's
was
right.
absolutely undermining. So they say they deliberately mentioned that there is no room for improvisation, and we're gonna speak loads about Sorkin's writing. There was a video I saw about when Sorkin was speaking to Jesse Eisenberg. First of all, Sorkin says that how words sound, it is as important to him as how words mean. So each choice of each syllable actually makes sense to Sorkin. So he was talking in that video with Jesse Eisenberg, and he says, "Oh, is it everyone or everybody?" He says, "No, I wrote it everybody. It's not everyone. Say it everybody." Because within the context of the sentence, the sound of everybody will not hit the same as the sound of everyone. So every single element of building that film was a deliberate action. And it confuses me a bit because everyone says actors need room to act, to improvise, to feel. But they didn't get that doing that film. They didn't get that at all. They were I wouldn't say they were dictated, but there were so many takes taken for each single scene. They say that they feel less pressure because they don't have to get it right from the first time. Basically, I'm trying to say that everything was well thought of before giving any room for the actors to be completely free, trying to imagine how things are going to go. No, Fincher and Sorkin basically imagined every single moment of the film.
I mean, what a match made in heaven. We're talking about two perfectionists, two people who are renowned for a very, very conservative approach. One to screenwriting and another one to directing. And you'd think that these two immovable forces would not be able to gel with one another. And yet, not only did it gel, I mean, it just produced pure artistry on the screen. To get back, I guess, to what Rory was saying as well. So, Rory, you were talking about, does Fincher think about his editing? The answer is a resounding yes. You can just tell that David Fincher shoots his shot reverse shot conversation pieces just like action movies. He doesn't just go, all right, I'm going to shoot character A, then character B. When each talk, maybe I'll hold on character A when the punchline of the scene will be delivered, right? That's how most directors would go about it. David Fincher will have 8 different setups, each ever so slightly different from the other. He will know exactly why he changed it just ever so slightly, because the moment she's going to say this particular line, I'm going to cut to this slightly different frame. In the greatest opening sequence of all time, there is this extraordinary video, I won't take credit for it, about the cutting of the opening scene. That scene opens on a 2-shot. It establishes, the two characters. It establishes them with that background. We can barely make them out. And it's perfectly in line with the thesis, which is, how do you distinguish yourself in Harvard, people who all got 1600 on their SATs? Well, in that particular shot, they're being drowned by the other Harvardians in the room. Magnificent. Then we begin with Erica Albrecht, not Mark Zuckerberg, because she is the emotional anchor of the entire film. We have this conversation. They're not listening to one another. The moment she hits the sweet spot, or you can get into a finals club, we get the first clean single. Revert to Mark Zuckerberg, single, or you can get into a final club. At that moment, Erica is not interested in staying in that topic. She breaks the conversation again, and she not only pulls back, we're also back in over the shoulder. Mark doesn't budge, and the conversation comes to a dead end. But that 2-shot now is closer than the opening. Why? Because now we are closer to the two characters. Back to the fighting. We're over the shoulder, over the shoulder, over the shoulder. And the moment the conversation starts taking a turn for the ugly, which is Erica is essentially breaking up with him, we're back to singles. And the moment she delivers the killer line, it'll be because you're an asshole. We're back on the single of Erica Albrecht. She leaves, and we have that 2-shot with the empty seat in front. What it does, and it's one of the points that I really wanted to raise with this episode, is Fincher taught me that there is musicality, there is movement, there is rhythm to conversations, and that you should respect it, and that you should analyze each and every word, and should you ever so slightly move that camera to tell something different, you 100% should. The Social Network is a film that is 90% about people talking in rooms. This film should not work And yet it stands as my top 10 favorite film of all time. And we even introduced by saying that it's maybe one of the most entertaining films of all time. And the reason for that is because Fincher never once takes it as two people in a room talking. He takes it as, if you follow the drama and you follow the conflict in the spoken word, it's as dramatic and as conflicted as any kind of action movie. So follow the drama with your camera. Don't follow the setup and where the characters are sitting in the room. And if you do that, then you just feel it. The moment where he says your best friend is suing you for $600 million. Cut to an empty chair. The confidence of David Fincher shooting emptiness, because that's going to hit way harder.
To echo you with the sequence of Zuckerberg tells the twins, if you had invented Facebook, you would have invented Facebook. There are 9 different angle variations. 9 different variations. So this is how Fincher plays with the emotional fluctuation of each scene. And that is also, I believe, it's totally dictated by how the film was written. Because if you look at... I think it's very hard for that film to speak about the screenplay and then speak about directing, or vice versa.
Of course.
Just you cannot dissect them.
Yeah. It's one and the same, yeah.
Yeah, looking at how the film is structured. First of all, let's ditch the 8-sequence approach theory that I keep swearing by. It doesn't work here. This film consists of 31 sequences, not 8. And how does that work? First of all, had that film been linear, so you would have the first act with Mark breaking up with Erica, breaking into 2 would be, hey, let's make Facebook. And then the midpoint meeting Sean Parker, this is where the friendship falls out. And then the final act with the 2 lawsuits. But Sorkin knows that for the first half of the film, there's not much drama. If we look through Zuckerberg's point of view, this guy is on the rise to create Facebook. He doesn't necessarily face a huge conflict. But how he can create drama? He gets that final act and flips it. And he keeps injecting the past timeline, which talks about the creation of Facebook, and keeps injecting these little moments of the actual 2 lawsuits or the actual conflict that Mark is facing. This is when I actually got back to Linda Aronson's book, 21st Century Screenplay. So first of all, this screenplay doesn't abide by a single rule, because it's not a classic 3-act structure. It's not what Linda Aronson calls a double narrative flashback, and it's not a tandem narrative flashback. It's everything all at once. So since Sorkin is completely aware that Zuckerberg's character is not interesting in the classical sense, there is no internal conflict, there is no character arc, there is no redemption, there is no change. How would he get the audience attention? By manipulating our perception of Mark. This is how the drama is created, not how Mark changes, but how the audience perception of Mark changes. Is he a genius? Is he an intellectual property thief? Is he a betrayer to a friendship? This is how he achieves by injecting these moments from the final act throughout the rise of Mark into becoming the owner of a dozen multi-billion-dollar company. That's one thing with the structure of the film. The other thing is how flashback is used not as an informative piece, but as an integral element of the equation that consists of setup, confrontation, payoff. So there is a question that happens in the present, during the lawsuit conversation, and then the confrontation will go back to a flashback to see it, and then the payoff happens in the present again. So for example, when he says it was an ambush, that's in the present timeline, that's the setup. What is the ambush? The flashback where we see the actual confrontation and how he got ambushed. And then the payoff when he looks at Mark and tells him, I was your best friend, you only had one friend. So flashback here is not a piece of information. It's actually a piece of drama that works in integrity with the present timeline. They are not distinctive. They are not separate from each other. So the film, it feels as if dramatically and thematically, it's the same event. They're not 2 separate events. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
No,
I
totally get everything that you're saying. This is not one for beginners. We are dealing with arguably the greatest living screenwriter and someone who has done and mastered the art of linear storytelling. Where I will disagree with you, Ahmed, is I find that this is one of the best negative arcs in the history of cinema. So there are positive arcs where you learn from your mistakes and you become the better man. And then there are negative arcs where ultimately you become completely consumed and you don't learn from your mistakes and you fall. The mother of all negative arcs, which is the one that is studied everywhere, is The Godfather. But I believe, albeit this one is more subtle. It is about a man who his want was just to be in a relationship. And his want was to be part of the Phoenix Club. He wants to be accepted. He wants to be cool. That simple. But what he needs to learn, I guess, is he's enough and he doesn't need that to be cool. That would be what most screenwriters would go for. But this is about a dude who is so consumed with that want that he rejects time and time again the opportunity to do the right thing. And in so doing, achieves extreme success, but loses everyone he's ever loved in the process. And time again, you see that he's given a choice. You could either choose the right or the wrong way. And he always bites on the wrong one. And it's a downfall because the Mark Zuckerberg at the beginning, who is still youthful and still had friends around him, is not the same at the end.
I think the question is, does he actually change, or our perception of him is the thing that fluctuates? Because thinking of, okay, going back to that opening scene where Erica delivers the final punch and she says, "You're an asshole." The lawyer, the very final scene, she says, "You're not an asshole." So I don't find that Mark changes, but how the word and accordingly the audience see him is what creates the emotional fluctuation. Him not necessarily going through an arc or a downfall arc or a negative arc, because from the beginning you can see that he's jealous of Eduardo. He's not emotionally invested in the relationship. If he loses Eduardo, you would see that he actually cares about that friendship. I didn't see him caring about it that much. I saw him consuming Eduardo and using Eduardo in every single moment.
I disagree in the sense that in the early face smash scene, there is just bro banter. I think that the jealousy really hits when he goes to that Jewish Caribbean night and he tells him, "I got punched by the Phoenix." I think that's where the ultimate Cain and Abel story begins, and my goodness, you betrayed me due to jealousy. But before that, there is genuine love that is ever so subtle between them. And it's just the smiles and how, like, for example, when he crashes the network, who is he so proud to tell that to? He doesn't tell it to all of his other programmer friends. He's looking at Eduardo, you know?
Yeah,
and
true.
when the Winklevoss, shall I say, give him that idea, he doesn't go to somebody else who also has money, which is 99% of Harvard. Hell no. He goes to Eduardo with it. I truly believe that Mark Zuckerberg had no intention of doing Eduardo dirty at the beginning when he pitched the Facebook to him. I think that it's as they went along and as both visions started differing one from the other, that's when the separation slowly spread and spread. Sean, at the beginning of Facebook, is facing multiple lawsuits. He is clearly not a snake oil salesman because he is an entrepreneur and he is incredibly successful. He's just not following the same trajectory that Eduardo is doing, where Eduardo still answers to his father. Eduardo still has a semblance of morality. And Mark Zuckerberg gets beguiled by that at the meeting, which to me is really like the shift. It's that infamous Sean Parker meeting in that really cool restaurant, and he goes, "Drop the just Facebook."
Something interesting as well, there is definitely a stronger sense of empathy from Eduardo's character. For example, that beginning scene where he's making face smash and he comes in, the first thing Eduardo does is ask him, "Are you okay? I saw the blog." Right. He's caring about his friend. And then they're in the lecture for Bill Gates, and the two women, they speak to Eduardo and they say, "Is that Mark Zuckerberg next to you?" They talk and they have a flirtatious conversation and they say, "Do you want to go for drinks later?" Eduardo is in the conversation. Mark doesn't even turn around. They don't exist. A normal person would at least react and you would turn and be like, "Who are these people that are interested?" He doesn't care. The scene later on when they're in the bar and Eduardo's in the stall getting on with the girl he met earlier, I thought what was really interesting there is Mark then comes in with another girl, but you don't see them in the stall. It doesn't cut to them in the other stall. To me, it added this sense of, if they did show Mark, it would show his intimate side. And it would take away from the idea of us just seeing the empathy through Eduardo. And all of this really builds to the end. In the climactic scene, he confronts Mark. We have complete sympathy towards Eduardo. And Mark, in that moment, finally feels a sense of empathy because he's like, "Oh, I have just lost my best friend."
Yeah, I agree. But I do think that we did see the human side of him, again, just from the blog post and creating Face Smash, as not a typical human reaction, but just as, you know, a normal human reaction of someone who's hurt because he just,
It's more of an insecurity,
got
though,
dumped
that
by his
one, I would
girlfriend.
say.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But that insecurity translates to humanity. You know what I mean? Someone who's
Yeah.
robotic won't necessarily be that insecure. And this is why I
Yeah.
say, like, there were clear signs of a human who had all kinds of faults and wasn't perfect, but at least was human enough to have a best friend, to socialize with the other programmers that are in his dorm room, and to actually have a girlfriend. And by the end of it, lose his best friend. The programmers, they're basically dudes who work for him. They also lost their humanity because they're always quote unquote wired in.
I'm Sean Parker. Oh, he's wired in. That's what I'm talking about.
They don't
Yes.
even get to speak anymore. No, you're wired
Yeah.
in now. F you. Now you're just a tool for us. So they've also been utilized as just, mechanical tools, and their humanity has been sucked in from them. And when he had an opportunity maybe to apologize again, Erica's not interested. That was a moment of humanity from Mark Zuckerberg. And that was a moment of hope. Had Erica accepted his apology or actually gone out to discuss with Mark Zuckerberg, things may have changed, because that was still the moment where he didn't swindle Eduardo. He was still 70-30 with Eduardo. But the fact that Erica rejects him again, what is his reaction to that?
We need to expand.
And what does we need to expand mean? I need Sean Parker. There's a reason why Sean Parker is the midpoint, and we cut to Sean Parker at that exact moment.
Yeah.
And so I have been given multiple wonderfully subtle scenes that hint at Mark wanting to make the right decision, but then going otherwise because of his insecurity. And this is why I call it the negative, because he did start out at a better place emotionally and as a moral person, but by the end of it, he's completely alone.
But does he?
Sorry?
Does he? Because
Does
he
he
starts with, does he actually start from an elevated moral place and then there's a downfall? Because with the first scene of the film, the chat with Erica, the guy is an asshole. He's absolutely condescending.
No,
Yes,
but
yes.
I know
Amount
what
of
Yas is saying.
disrespect.
He starts out as a piece of shit, and he's an even bigger piece of shit at the end. That's his negative arc.
That's pretty much it. He starts off as an asshole, but he's still like a likable asshole, and he just ends up as a total.
I strongly suggest for you guys to read Linda Aronson's chapter about flashbacks in her book, because the reason when Rory was saying that we get to feel more sympathy for Eduardo, I strongly agree. We actually get to feel sympathy for Eduardo. We get to feel sympathy for the Winklevoss twins. The least we feel sympathy towards is Mark's character. That's why I know it's not very interesting speaking about books and being nerds, but this is my language and this is how I'm gonna speak.
Yeah.
When Linda speaks about the flashback, why it's a very sensitive tool to use. She never mentions the social network. By the way, her book was written before the film was out, was even made. But she mentions that basically the protagonist is an enigmatic outsider in the sense of he's the catalyst to how every other character changes without him necessarily changing. That's why I'm more leaning towards that Mark being not only less sympathetic, or if sympathetic at all, but actually being the emotional catalyst for every change every other character goes through without him necessarily changing. Yes, he does lose, but does his point of view on the world or his philosophy actually change? Is there a huge moment of realization that, I fucked up? Like, because if you look at Sean Parker, it's an Icarus structure. It's a downfall. And he does lose everything. Eduardo, he gets betrayed and he realizes that there is no room for platonic relationships or friendships in business. The Winklevoss, they realize that there is no room for being gentlemen in this world. And they have been resisting to take things to the core, but finally they do. So there are pivotal character moments of change in every major character other than Mark's.
I disagree, because I think Marx is, at the end, the explosive argument with Eduardo. I think that's his change.
You mean the moment of
I've
silence
actually-
when Eduardo tells him you had only one friend?
The moment where he says, "You better lawyer up, asshole."
Ah,
Because you can see on Mark's face, it's finally sunken
Yeah.
in. I've just destroyed my only friendship.
And then he makes it
Yeah.
literal by saying to Sean Parker he didn't have to be so mean on him.
Yeah. Exactly.
So he's been sued by Eduardo Severin, right? He knows that he could throw all kinds of daggers at Eduardo, one of them being the infamous feeding chicken to the chicken story. And he goes, you fucking told him about the story about the chicken? And then the lawyer says, Eduardo, Mr. Eduardo, please calm down. If you want to know the truth, we have our own researchers that can find that kind of story in the Crimson. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg resisted it. And then he cuts to him and he goes, oops, which I fucking love. That gives me yet another sign of humanity, which shows me that there is goodness in him.
Can I just mention a couple of my favorite lines in this that really stood out to me? When the Winklevosses are talking about Mark Zuckerberg messing them over, one of them says, I'm 6'5", 225, and there's two of me. That is like such a good line.
To add to that, I think it's the same thing. The thing that really killed me is when he goes, no, I don't want to do it. He'll think it's a stupid idea. Divya's like, what? And then he goes, it's against the gentleman's code. And then Divya's like, you thought he'd be the only one to find that stupid?
Sorry. No, it's fine. When Mark confronts Erica in the restaurant, or he goes up to her in the restaurant and she's with her friends, and she is obviously angry about his blog, she says, the internet isn't written in pencil, it's written in ink.
Yeah.
And that is another one where it's like,
Great line.
These lines, like really like Shakespearean lines.
Yeah. So even though I watched the film twice, once when it was like a huge hit over a decade ago, the second time was last night preparing for the episode, and I read the script like 3 or 4 years ago while I was doing my screenwriting masters. It stays in my head. It is staying. Like, despite the long duration between experiencing the material, like once watching it, once reading the script, watching again,
Yeah.
it's so impactful that it is staying. I feel like I know it by heart, even though I've experienced it. I've experienced the material a few times. So this is how impactful the film is.
I totally agree. What about you, Rory?
I just watched it last night, and then the last time I watched it was like 10 years ago.
Damn.
And the time I watched it 10 years ago, I probably wasn't even paying attention, which is wild. I could remember bits, and then I think it's just one of those films where like you just watch clips on
Coming back.
like YouTube or whatever. But I couldn't remember it so vividly until yesterday, and then I watched it completely all the way through.
This is one of the films that I watch like once a year. It literally is in my top 10. It's
So
pretty
you
funny.
really watch some films like once a year?
Dude,
I don't think I do that with any films.
Look, Amadeus, I watch that at least once every 2 years. Social Network, at least once every 2 years. Not necessarily every year, but I know that there's a moment where I'm like, I'm going to put that on. Wolf of Wall Street is another one that I watch like religiously.
I don't know if I do that with any films.
Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, maybe, but even that, like, it was more when I was a kid. I used to be obsessed with watching the same film. When I was probably like 8 or 9 years old, I watched King Kong, Peter Jackson's King Kong. I
Yeah.
watched it every week for like a year.
Yeah, but that's
I was
just
obsessed with it.
I think that's just being a child, to be fair. Because I also
Maybe.
was the same.
Maybe.
I was
But
obsessed
know
with
it-
movies.
I think I know every line of that off by heart. Peter Jackson's King Kong, I think I could recite it off my head, which is pretty wild. Because it's not even like a spectacular film in terms of dialogue.
It was beauty killed the beast.
But I think it's the spectacle. Because I watched it when I was like 8 in the cinema. It stuck with me, so
It
that's
didn't
why.
scare the shit out of you with that fucking insect scene. I remember my father
No, it
was
did.
so good
It
at
did scare me, that scene. But I was still fascinated by the film because the visual effects were so insane. And I even think the visual effects are better than 99% of movies that have come after it.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
I don't know. Peter Jackson has a very healthy relationship with CGI, man. Until
Yeah.
The Hobbit. But
Yeah.
that was studio, I
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah, I
Much
think
less
it
like
was,
he had
yeah.
creative
Yeah.
control. Rory, how would you rank this film? Like in your appreciation?
I think it's really, really good. I don't know if it's in my top anything in particular. I can understand why.
So what do you think it's missing for your particular taste for it to be in your top anything?
I honestly couldn't tell you because like I said, I can see why it would be in a lot of people's top 10s. I mean, every scene is impeccably well written and edited and directed. But I just think there's other films that would slot in my top 10 that just happen to have a bigger impact, in my opinion.
Do
So
you-
that's
That's
why
fair.
it wouldn't
What
fit
is
in
your
there.
relationship to biopics? Do you like biopics?
Not really.
I actually
don't think
hate
so.
biopics.
Yeah, I don't think there's any particular biopics that really did I really care for greatly.
But I think The Social Network does something brilliantly that Amadeus also does excellently, which is instead of doing a story about the life, you just focus on one particular moment, one moment that changed it all for the subject. Mozart, it's his relationship with Salieri, meeting Salieri, that toxic relationship that led to Mozart's downfall and Salieri's downfall. And in this particular case, the 1 year it took for him to create Facebook, and how that obsession led him to lose everything that was human in his life. And when you just focus on one point in a character's life and you then give that story a classic dramatic arc, you don't really have the hint of a biopic. It's just a wonderfully told three-dimensional story.
Exactly.
And we come out with a catharsis. But then there are problems with movies like, I don't know, Bohemian Rhapsody off the top of my head. We are going to focus on the entire freaking career from, his birth all the way to his death. And we're just going to hit on all of these greatest hits. And so what it is to me is that's just a ticket to watch, like a Queen greatest hits
totally
album.
Agree.
That's really it.
That's why the structure does magic in this film. So I can think of three now. You mentioned Amadeus. You mentioned and now we're talking about The Social Network, and I can think of Oppenheimer as well. It's about a specific moment and then the flashback and having unreliable narrators taking us through the story. That's what makes the biopics interesting. And other biopics like The Theory of Everything, there are dozens of examples about these films. And I always get the feeling as if the main characters, they know that they're great. And they know they're destined for greatness. So there is no arc. There is nothing interesting. Because you're basically watching Freddie Mercury, knowing he's the great Freddie Mercury, and he's going to be the greatest musician of all time. It takes away all the essence. So
and the stakes. Like, for example, the movie Michael. None of us have seen it here because it's not out yet. But just looking at the trailer, it starts with him being a baby, Jackson 5, the father saying, "Listen to me, you're gonna be a great person," and then you're gonna cut to him being grown, and maybe it'll end when he dies or whatever. But how the hell are you gonna encompass 80 years worth of a character's life in just 2 hours?
Exactly. So that's why it was essential, and it does work perfectly, having other people tell the story, not the main character navigating his life.
What's your take then? I'm really curious on the Aaron Sorkin style. Snappy, witty.
I think it's better when he's not directing it.
And why do you think that is?
Because I don't think his directing complements his own writing. I feel like he's trying to direct how he writes. And it worked with Fincher because Fincher is a freak.
I think people are perverts.
He isn't afraid of using all these psychological tactics and techniques and really going into the depth. Whereas Sorkin, there's too much of a safety with his directing. It feels too safe. It feels too conventional.
He was actually asked to direct the film. Yeah.
Yes, he was. And he was freaked the fuck out because he was like, he thought that he wasn't very good as a director. I think that I see your point, Rory. And the best example that I can give is, I think it's called Molly's Game or Polly's Game. I forgot the film.
Molly's Game, yeah.
I only saw this film once, and I can tell you that Fincher thinks cinematically.
Yeah.
What he does by thinking cinematically is he has the snappy editing, the rhythm of the editing, where to place the camera to really accentuate each line. He really knows how each sequence is going to interplay between one another and how they're going to transition from one to the other. But in Molly's Game, it felt that Aaron Sorkin had too much control because he's also the director. And I think that because Sorkin had too much power, what happens is even the genius can be in his own head. The issue with Molly's Game, I remember there were just so many rambling voiceovers in that movie. That's the one thing I remember that would really trigger me. And flashbacks coming in and out. You have to understand that if you're going to be doing a freaking film where you've got 3 pieces of action in 3 separate times, that takes huge command of film language to have it super clear in your head. The pacing was completely off as opposed to this one. What about you, Ahmed? What's your take on Aaron Sorkin's style?
I think it happens naturally that I mainly focus on his writing because to me, he's a writer, and to everyone, he is. I think
Yeah, me
thinking
too.
about Sorkin as a director, it requires some sort of a mental effort. I was like, does he direct? How good is he when it comes to directing? But it's always Aaron Sorkin, the writer, taking over the craft and taking over the creation of the film. Then you can sense Aaron Sorkin's direction, style, or presence. So I think as if there is a less qualified director working with an insanely qualified writer. So I'm not a fan of his directing. I watched Molly's Game as well, and I think like it was alright, it was okay. But looking at something like the Social Network, you can sense, and that's gonna contradict how something I said at the beginning. Like people don't speak about Fincher's directing as much as Aaron Sorkin's writing with the Social Network, because of course the writing is insanely great, but you can still sense Fincher's fingerprint in every moment of the film. With Sorkin's directing, sometimes I get lost. I'm like, what is your identity as a director? Because I can totally sense your identity as a writer. Yet, as a director, I don't totally get an understanding of who you are behind the camera.
You know how you say you need to have a voice, yeah? Voice entails that you have a style, and a style that is easily identifiable, okay? So for example, Sorkin, the witty dialogue, snappy. Quentin Tarantino, long monologues, dark humor, the morbidness, and at the same time, highly self-referential. But do you necessarily need to have a style in order to be considered like a great, and I mean an identifiable
I don't
style?
think it's by choice.
Because, for example,
Except for Wes Anderson.
Stanley Kubrick had an incredible career, and one film is completely different from the next.
I think Stanley's style came more through his directing than it did his writing, though. Right?
Right, yeah, I agree.
Because there's easy trademarks of his directing.
Yes,
But I
I
think
agree.
with
I agree.
Stanley's-
That's a good
Kubrick
point.
stare.
Sidney Lumet then. Sidney Lumet
Yeah,
is completely
did-
different.
did-
12 Angry Men is completely differently shot than Dog Day Afternoon.
Yeah,
But you
that's
know
true.
what?
That is very true.
Completely
thing
differently
is-
shot
Completely
from
different.
Long Day's
And
Journey
look
to
at
the
the
Night.
duration.
Even Milos Forman has that as well, where the directing is different, because Amadeus is very different from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Which
the
is also
directing.
completely different from Flint.
And Man on the Moon, the Jim
Yeah.
Carrey
Yeah.
film. So it's the same with
But
him. They
Guys, just
they-
look at
Yeah.
when these films were made. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, it was, I think, mid-70s. Amadeus, late 80s. So that 15-year gap would definitely... He's not the same man, so it makes sense that his style and his voice would somehow evolve and change. The same with Kubrick. Like, if you compare Dr. Strangelove to Eyes Wide Shut, I think that's like a 30-year gap between both films. There's
Sure,
some-
but Quentin Tarantino started writing in 92, and his style with Once Upon a Time is still very identifiable, and same thing with
Yeah.
Aaron Sorkin. He began late 80s with the play A Few Good Men, and A Few Good Men, his mark is as identifiable as later in the 90s with West Wing, and then late 2000s with Social Network, and then even more so with Chicago 7, which is in late 2010s, if not 2020s. That's a near 30-year period there, where his style, it's pretty identifiable. Like if you were to take just the script without the title, and you just read a scene from A Few Good Men, A Few I swear to God, you'll be able to say, oh no, that's a Sorkin script right there.
And I would say another good example as well is Charlie Kaufman, because he started out as a writer and he has a very distinctive style.
He does. He does.
If you look at all of his movies, the ones he wrote that he didn't direct, and then the ones that he did direct, it's still Charlie Kaufman's style.
Charlie Kaufman, it's so interesting because with Sorkin, again, and Tarantino's style, you read the dialogue and you just get a sense that, oh, this is the way Sorkin would write dialogue, or this is the way Tarantino would speak. It's like a voice. With Charlie Kaufman, what I found even equally fascinating is it's actually not even the dialogue. He doesn't have a particular voice when he speaks. It's more thematic and moody. It's the surrealness with this incredible morbid humor that makes it Charlie Kaufman style. So all in all, Ahmed, what your take on Aaron Sorkin's style you were saying?
To me, he doesn't come as a director with a distinctive directing style. This is what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you like to read his scripts?
Oh, of course. of course, insane, just like insanely entertaining.
You know, I find that Aaron Sorkin's voice is extremely similar to Michael Lewis, the guy who made The Big Short. It's very similar.
Yeah.
That's a nice shirt. Do they make it from end?
So Social Network is revolutionary on so many ends. It's brilliant for its directing. It's brilliant for its acting, of course, and it's brilliant for its writing, as all the video essays will say. But the premium revolution, and this doesn't get discussed nearly as much as it should, that the Social Network brought in is Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross and their revolutionary soundtrack. That soundtrack is so revolutionary, they created the imprint all of these thriller shows are trying to copy. I had this conversation with a post supervisor on the show that I'm working on now. She said they always have temp music, and then of course, that temp music then gets replaced by the actual composer's music. But that temp music sets the tone. 5 shows back to back, all 5 of them had the Social Network theme in the timelines of all of these different shows. And so I was speaking to the post supervisor about this, and I was like, well, what the fuck's going on here? And she goes, they broke the game. That Trent Reznor soundtrack, I've heard it in 8 out of 10 of her shows. And when the directors then speak to the composers, the problem that most of the composers face is they always say, give me more Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. And a lot of modern composers actually have an issue with them because they were so revolutionary in creating that really serious and deeply dark, moody ambiance that apparently some even go as far as to say that they are one of the main reasons why the classic music compositions aren't the same anymore. So if you look at the original soundtracks of the movies, obviously, of the 80s and the 90s, you had your Ennio Morricone's, John Williams, these very, very bold and strong, classical music voices for mass spectacle. Mm-hmm. Now you don't really have that anymore. And they said that obviously Hans Zimmer was the beginning of the nail in that coffin because Hans Zimmer started using a lot more synth sounds. But Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor was like the final blow. Some love it, but others fucking hate it.
I think that it works well in this film because there was moments in this film that almost felt like a music video, and the soundtrack combined with the extremely precise editing really built that together.
And you know that he used to direct music videos, right?
Yeah, and commercials, right?
Okay. The flashback and the present. What do you guys think how the tone shifts between the time where we see Zuckerberg as a student and when we see him and every other character debating the lawsuit?
What's that change to you?
For the majority of the creation phase of Facebook, it was happening at night. It felt like a student's nightlife.
Yeah, I think that the most glaring change between the scenes in the present and the scenes in the past was the scene in the past were more moody, more contrasty light, and more of that green David Fincher filter. But then in the present, it matched, I guess, the tone of the room. Like, the truth will come to light, and therefore it has to be brighter. And the filter was a bit more yellowy. What I think of David Fincher in this film, I think that this is his masterpiece because, like I said at the beginning, Fincher managed to show the world that you can have a 2-hour film where the people just talk in a room, and let's see how dramatic you can make it. Mark Zuckerberg calls Eduardo Saverin and he's like, did you freeze all of the accounts? You do realize that you may have just completely obliterated our entire operation because if it crashes one day, then that's it. We're going to lose all of the trust of the people using Facebook. And in order to show that both characters are actually not in alignment and do not see eye to eye, you will notice that Eduardo Saverin is looking right and he's on the right-hand side of the shot. Mark Zuckerberg is looking at the left and he's on the left-hand side. And so it happens when you're intercutting visually, you are seeing 2 characters who literally do not see eye to eye. And then you cut to the Sean Parker and Mark Zuckerberg sequence where Sean calls him up from the police station and he's trying to say, I'm sorry, look, it's not really bad, don't worry about it. Look at that sequence. It's the same apology scene, and where Eduardo Saverin held his own because he says, I was hurt and I did have a reason for doing this. The other one is like a child who is just yearning for the hug of the mother again after having disappointed the mother. And how you can tell is where Mark Zuckerberg was in the previous shot. Mark Zuckerberg was at the right-hand side of the frame. Sean, he'll be at the left end of the frame, and he walks towards the right-hand side of the frame. What does freaking David Fincher do? He cuts to Mark Zuckerberg, switching from right to left. And so what happens is, Sean ends on the right-hand side of the frame, and that's Mark saying, no, I don't forgive you. This is where David Fincher just shows me he's just on a completely other level. I had never seen this, ever, in any other movie where there were shot reverse shots. You think that a dialogue sequence doesn't need that many setups and doesn't need that much thought? You look at David Fincher movies and he's like, no, you're just lazy. It needs just as and requires just as much thought as your action set piece that you're going to storyboard.
Yeah.
And this is what I think of Fincher. When I look at this film, I see why people say he is the father of all meticulous directors.
I think there are only 2 moments of long silence in the film. Like long silence, not the one that is before Atticus says you're an asshole.
Yeah.
Where the credits are rolling at the beginning of the film, and the one with Winklevoss's race, the rowing race. The first one, there are wide angles, Mark is fast pacing towards his dorm, he's alone, and you get sense from that silence and him being so little in a wide frame, there is a huge sense of loneliness. And you can sense that this is somehow an intro that the film is about a lonely man who cannot maintain relationships. So I felt that this, of course, was deliberate, was intentional. So it sets up the mood for someone who's not good at communication. The other moment was with Winklevoss's during the race. It was the only scene in the script with a lot of action lines. I think it was about 1 page without dialogue. I think this is the only moment we actually got to have a break.
Why do you think they kept that race scene? Because every single scene in the movie, there is an element of causality. It's just, well, here's what would have happened after what you saw before. And so there's there is a bridge that leads from one scene to the next. And it's just a continuation of where we stopped in the last scene. Because you could have just cut to them post-race losing and then Divya or whatever saying, oh, it's in England.
I disagree. I think they still haven't taken the next leap yet, which is one of the Winklevosses wants to pursue it legally, but the other one doesn't. And I think to me, it's almost symbolic of that they haven't managed to cross the threshold yet. And if they had crossed that threshold, maybe some stress would be alleviated. In the next scene, they do take that leap because one of them's like, let's get that nerd.
Gotcha. Yeah,
I agree. I didn't think of Rory's explanation, but I totally agree. But I also think I saw it as a rhythmic necessity rather than a dramatic necessity. We needed a moment to breathe. We needed a moment to calm down and spend some time in nature.
Yeah, but it's still an intense scene as well, though. It's still intense.
Yeah, it's like the most intense with the most intense score as well.
Yeah.
Oh, it is intense, but compared to the rest of the film, it is the least intense.
Yeah, I see your point.
Yeah, right.
So I think it was a rhythmic decision.
Do you think this film is an example of Fincher's best work?
Personally, that's my favorite film of David Fincher. So the answer is a resounding yes.
Okay, right.
I think that it's because it's so insanely subtle. To the point that, look, I've just broken down 3 conversation pieces, and I'm sure that at least 2 of them you guys just discovered for the first time what I was saying. You're like, I felt that, but I didn't see it. Basically, it's a perfect film for me. I believe that it's Fincher's greatest work.
Yeah, I agree. Because thinking of Fight Club or Zodiac or other pieces of his, I think the thrilling element or the action element in both films gives the director a lot to work with. But with that script, of course it does give him a lot to work with, but again, it's a biopic at the end of the day. It's not about big on-screen events.
Yeah,
it's not about explosions. It's not about finding who's the killer. The action is way more subtle compared to the rest of Fincher's work, and that's when you see a master at work, when the action is very subtle. The action is basically through dialogue, and he yet still manages to make it as engaging as if it's a car chase scene.
And I've just realized that Zodiac is a biopic about the Zodiac killer, right? He has his own biopic.
That's it. Take good care, guys.
Peace
See
out.
you later.